do a land acknowledgement on which we're gathering today. I would like to acknowledge that this session today is occurring in the shared, unceded, and traditional homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Elenice Ferguson joining us today to speak on the subject of a developmental approach to working with trauma, integrating Indigenous knowledge for culturally relevant healthcare responses. This is clearly a very important subject, and I really appreciate all the sign up and the enthusiasm for this activity together. So we're looking forward to that discussion on this. So as soon as Elder Glyda join, I'll be inviting her to have to give us a opening prayer, as she always has done for the last year and a half. Incidentally, I just learned and refreshed in my memory that this is the 6th year that we're having these Indigenous Health Rounds. So really appreciate you all, the audience members, for participating, and also want to thank all the past speakers. And also I want to thank the Vancouver Coastal Health, the committee on cultural safety, engaging physicians, the Indigenous Cultural Safety Task Group for this. Maybe before Elder Glyda join us, let me just give you a bit of a session overview. Today's discussion, we welcome, as usual, your questions and comments. You're very welcome first in the chat if you choose to do your land acknowledgements. So please feel free to do so, and we look forward to you and your acknowledgements. Secondly, we absolutely welcome you with your questions. For your questions and comments, please enter in the Q&A box. Please try not to use the chat box for that. We'll be monitoring both, but for the Q&A session, we'll be going to the Q&A box for the questions. I will continue to try to pick out if there's any comments or questions from chats to supplement Q&A. But our preference is if you can help us with the Q&A for your comments, that would be amazing. Again, thank you very much. I'm seeing an acknowledgement now coming in, so really appreciate that and look forward to seeing that. I really like to thank our partners in these rounds. We want to thank the Vancouver Coastal Health, Indigenous Health, in the strong partnership with us to carry on these rounds. Really appreciate Ministry of Health, its foundational support for these rounds, and partnership with First Nations Health Authority and also Vancouver Physician Staff Associations to carry out these rounds and support the discussion with it. I also would like to acknowledge that in the VPSA, we've set up an Engaging Physicians in the Indigenous Cultural Safety Task Group, or EPIC Task Group. I really want to thank the members for the planning of these type of rounds, including today's topic. So really appreciate that. We're grateful for the support of the Ministry of Health Patients as Partners initiative, with whom we've really developed a long-standing relationship over the past 10 years in advancing person and family-centered care. The Ministry of Health continues to advance the shared journey of reconciliation, apply equity and anti-racism approaches, and address systemic racism in the health system. This is recognized in the Ministry's mandate letter that states that the Ministry will continue working towards true and meaningful reconciliation by supporting opportunities for Indigenous peoples to be full partners in inclusive and sustainable province we're building together. In this work, the Ministry of Health continues to address recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, Call to Action on DRIP, and the In Plain Sight report. For more information, please visit patientsaspartners.com to find other organizations who offer free events and resources on person and family-centered care, chronic disease, and caregiver support. I'd also like to acknowledge our partners at Vancouver Coastal Health, Indigenous Health, VCH plays a critical role in upholding the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action, and in implementing the 24 recommendations in the In Plain Sight report. Together, we're committed to celebrating Indigenous ways of knowing and being, to acknowledging the strength and courage demonstrated while enduring generations of atrocities, and to embedding Indigenous cultural safety across the healthcare system. We also would like to acknowledge the support of the First Nations Health Authority and their participation in our planning of these events. And it's just tremendous to be able to partner with the First Nations Health Authority in this way. And we also want to acknowledge the support of the Vancouver Physician Staff Association as we work together to engage the physician community together with the interprofessional community in this meeting to build a more collaborative, inclusive, and caring community together. Okay. So Elder Glyda is in our room, which is amazing. Thank you. And Elder Glyda, thank you very much for persisting despite all the technological difficulties. We appreciate it. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kendall.
Thank you. Elder Glyda, may I invite you to help us with the opening prayer now? And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be able to be a part of the circle here. A warm welcome to Dr. Eloise Ferguson. And just looking forward to the presentation about integrating Indigenous knowledge for culturally relevant healthcare. And I'm Elder Glyda from Fla'amin Nation, and my mother's people, that's Sunshine Coast. And forgive me for all the technical difficulties, but I'd like to begin and open in a good way. And I would like to invite you all to think about the beauty of the day as we open and offer blessing. Creator, grandmother, great-grandmother, grandfather, great-grandfather, inviting you into our beautiful sacred circle and asking for blessings for each person here and for the families. I'm asking for prayers for all of the ones that are needing to be lifted up and that are struggling through challenges today. And I'm asking this day be filled with peace and gentleness, asking for blessings for all of our sacred animals. Take care of them, Creator. And I'm also inviting some prayers for the ones that are struggling with many challenges that we're facing. And I'm also asking for prayers of peace within our own heart, within our families, with our colleagues, with our nation and country, and right around the world. I'm asking for peace. I'm asking this in a good and humble way as we begin this amazing presentation, raising my hands in gratitude to you all and appreciating your patience. All my relations, emotes, again. Thank you. Mosier. Back to you, Dr. Kendall.
Great. Thank you so much, Elder Glyda. And despite all the technical difficulties, we are so glad that you're here. And as usual, you open our meeting in such a nice and really calm and way so that we can receive the wisdom and the knowledge and the sharing of this. So, Elder Glyda, thank you so much for this. Let me now, it's my honor to have Dr. Eloise Ferguson as our guest speaker today. In today's session, Dr. Ferguson will provide insights into the how to conceptualize knowledge about trauma through the frames of intergenerational healing, interprofessional neurobiology, and developmental approaches to assessing and healing trauma. I would now like to open the stage and warmly welcome Dr. Ferguson. Dr. Ferguson is an Anishinaabe psychologist and professor at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan. She's a member of the Sandy Bay Ojibwe First Nation in Manitoba and a Canadian Research Chair in Indigenous Health, Healing, and Community Revitalization in the Department of Community, Culture, and Global Studies. She lives in unceded Syilx territory of the West Bank First Nations. Dr. Ellenaise Ferguson, thank you so much for joining us. Let me pass the floor to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Kendall Ho. I know you would like me to call you Kendall. I acknowledge you and all of your team who have worked very hard to organize this learning time together. I acknowledge the words of Glyda Morgan and her ancestors that she invoked from the Sunshine Coast. She spoke about her grandparents, the grandparents of her people. This invocation is going to look after us as we tackle a very difficult and heartbreaking topic. I can't speak to any size of room without this being intensely personal for some people. So please do what you need to do to feel comfortable, to feel safe. I acknowledge all 325 participants that are in this Zoom room to learn with me today, and that it is lunchtime. And I hope that as I deliver my words and share my knowledge with all of you, that while you're eating, that you take in the words as good words and that they nourish you as well as your lunches. I really appreciate the time that you've spent to look at developmental approaches to working with trauma, integrating Indigenous knowledge for culturally relevant healthcare. So my people, the Anishinaabe people, we have been dealing with trauma and toxic stress for forever. And we have very strong, well-developed practices for caring and caregiving. And they may not initially be recognized as healthcare practices, but I offer them up to you today, and as well as some of the thinking shared by many of my teachers with you today, so that it may assist you in your work on the front lines. And I acknowledge that many of you are frontline workers and many of you work in very high stress situations, and that they themselves may be sites of toxic stress for you as well. So maybe that some of the topics of this can be related to how to navigate workplace stress, as well as interpersonal attachment to your colleagues, to your peers, to your networks. I acknowledge all of you in this as I speak. So this is a little bit of the outline. Oh, sorry, I clicked too fast. I just must be patient. Hang on. I'd like to share the outline. There it is. So some of my teachers, people who I've read extensively, and I'll be drawing on their work as I talk to you today, are Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, and I consider myself kind of like a goddaughter of her work. I'm very grateful for the work that she has done on intergenerational trauma and healing. She studied in New York City when she was at Columbia University with Holocaust survivors. And with the lessons that she learned with working with Holocaust survivors, she brought those lessons to her people in South Dakota, the Lakota people, and published interventions, created instruments for measuring and assessing health and healing among her people who engaged in different Indigenous practices, principally Lakota practices for healing intergenerational trauma, grief, and loss. I have some resources to share. One of the questions that was submitted was around assessment and instruments, and I can share that later on. But from her work has emerged the whole field of intergenerational trauma and healing, and there's extensive literature in that domain. I also want to talk about the writings of Daniel Siegel, who's greatly influenced my own clinical practice, using interpersonal neurobiology as a frame for assessing and understanding how trauma walks and acts in our lives, in our clients' lives, as well as our own lives. And then primarily, I'm going to be drawing on some training that I received from a BC-based psychologist, Dr. Chuck Geddes. Back in 2013, he developed the Complex Care and Intervention program, and it was a developmental approach to assessing trauma. I'll share a little bit about that with you as well, and how important it is to assess and treat trauma that's been experienced throughout development, throughout the lifespan, in order to heal developmental lags. And we can all accumulate developmental lags due to the toxic stress and the trauma we've experienced throughout our lifespan. And inside each and every one of us as adults, we have a child that's been impacted by these things. And cultural care, particularly Indigenous cultural caring practices, do facilitate healing from these toxic stress impacts as well as intergenerational trauma impacts. And I'll be spending the last half of the workshop really focusing on those interventions for you. So, who I am in this work, this is me and my children and my mother. My mother attended residential school, my grandmother attended residential school. In the picture on the left with the nun is my mother in the back, and her brother, Robert Houle, and her sister, the late Catherine Masseau. And they attended Sandy Bay Indian Residential School until grade 8, at which time Canada at the time had an agreement that education integration was permitted. So Canada followed the United States around the integration of education around similar timelines. In 1948, it became legal for Indians, as we were called at the time, to attend school with whites. So when residential school ended in grade 8, this nun here wrote letters to different schools within the province of Manitoba that had an agreement with the Indian Affairs to educate Indians. Up until this time, we would not have had an education past what was given us in residential school. My parents and my family and my grandparents suffered greatly, and so be it. I'm here to stand in front of you and to deliver this information very boldly and very bluntly, but also to let you know that recovery is possible through the generations, even though residential school runs 3 generations deep in my family. And that there's a lot of research, particularly by Dr. Amy Bombay, that indicates that the greater the number of generations of residential school in a family, the greater incidence of different mental health issues, including PTSD, intergenerational trauma, and mood disorders. So here I am, pictured in the middle with my PhD in hand, graduated from the University of British Columbia Counseling Psychology program. And I did this with my family, and I did this with the assistance of many people who endured a toxic legacy of education in Canada. And so we are continuing to heal. On the right there is my daughter, who she was born during the middle of my postdoc in forensic psychology. I never did finish my work in forensic psychology, but it was quite an education. And together as a family, we do this work to break cycles and heal from intergenerational trauma and loss. So this is an image that was created by a relative in my family who I've spoken to extensively about what it means to recover from intergenerational trauma and loss. And it's beadwork on birch bark background. And the birch bark or wigwas that Anishinaabe people use was for shelter, for medicine, for transcribing, for craft design, baskets, birch bark biting, nanobush storytelling, and it's symbolic to purity and resilience, much like which we strive for in our healing processes. The florals inside are all different medicinal flowers with different healing properties that I don't have time to get into at the moment. But really, what this image is intended to reflect in our talk today is the interconnection between the plant world and the human world, and how that we can work together to keep one another strong. That there's a lot of plant laws, there's a lot of plant scholarship that can help us to understand recovery processes from different injuries that we can accumulate, whether they're physical, whether they're spiritual, whether they're intergenerational, or they're through chronic stress or toxic stress. So yeah, the name of the piece is Onishin Gitchikon, a beautiful mind or a beautiful way of thinking. So let's hold this together as we move through this material. It will get a little bit difficult as we proceed through the slides. So historical trauma was first written about by, like I said, Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart. It's extensively written about in the Indigenous health literature And it's a little bit messy. I would say there are four main domains in the literature that historical trauma can inform, and that's a separate presentation altogether. But really, what I want to talk to you about, what your understanding should be taking away from this workshop, is that historical trauma stems from colonization in the context of Indigenous people, which includes forced removal of our people from our traditional lands. And I'm really grateful that many of us are participating in land acknowledgements because this is part of the path back towards healing from that form of trauma. Um, Dr. Yellowhorse Braveheart defines historical trauma as cumulative and generational emotional, physical, and psychological harm stemming from mass trauma exposure. It encompasses trauma exposure and the psychological and social responses to the traumatic event exhibited by the victimized group. And many of you working on the front line are going to see the residue of this and may not completely, fully appreciate some of the historical events that may have given rise to what you witness in acute care and frontline mental health practice and your nursing practices, wherever you may be. But they're there. There's a history that informs that presentation. Um, So, how do we stay strong? And there are different models of intergenerational healing from historical trauma. And I'm just going to talk about a few that I've observed in the 25 plus years that I've been doing this work in First Nations communities in British Columbia as well as in Manitoba. And this is what I see. I see in our communities, we have cultural healing movements. There's a resurgence of cultural practices and a reclaiming of them. They were outlawed until 1951, and even after that, they were still enforced as though they were outlawed. My mother was born in 1948, grew up in the Sundance methods of bringing communities together for healing and for prayer, and the Indian agents were still enforcing the takedown of our Sundance lodges, even though it was after 1951. So now we're working very hard to bring back a lot of these methods that were suppressed and outlawed. We also see well-variety movements, abstinence-based movements in British Columbia has many, many exemplars, including Alkali Lake as being the first initiates of abstinence-based movements of having like what we call dry reserves or alcohol and drug-free reserves. And these are what we would call well-variety movements or abstinence-based. Next, we have ceremonies and spirituality, which is the reclaiming of our highest form of political expression is our ceremonies. We also have, many of you may be providing this as well as I do too. Individual counseling and harm reduction is now on the scene. It wasn't as popular in the 90s, and that's really what we are using a lot in our healthcare settings now. We also have a change in lifestyle towards more outdoor activities, hunting, trapping, and harvesting. We have sports and athletics, and we have arts and creative practices. And these are some of the things that I'm witnessing as promoting healing from the effects of historical trauma in the First Nations communities that I've worked in. And there are many, many more that are too numerous to list. But I make it a practice in my presentations to talk about the strengths first before talking about the sadness. So again, I mentioned that in 2015, or sorry, it was 2013, I received some training from Dr. Chuck Geddes, and he was a contract psychologist. I don't know that he's still contracting there now. I've been out of this work for a while, who was working with children and families affected by toxic stress and the impacts of intergenerational trauma. And he had an assessment model. I'll share a little bit about that. It was based on this neurosequential model of trauma repair. And so, as I was learning this neurosequential model of how to repair trauma in kids and families, I started to see how these interventions mapped onto many First Nations caring practices that I was aware of, that I was raised with, that I grew up with. And in some ways, I believe that First Nations caring practices are ahead of biomedical models in terms of understanding how to take care of other people, take care of humans, take care of our animal relatives. So I'm going to code switch a little bit between the biomedical trauma language that came from Dr. Geddes' training and First Nations practices for healthy living. So this is something that I got from Dr. Geddes, and this is what he would explain to a wraparound care team model approach to assessing for the impacts of developmental impacts of trauma. And the green line, he would say, would represent healthy development, healthy brain development, and overall holistic development of somebody prenatally through to adulthood if they did not have any incidences of toxic stress or trauma. The yellow line represents somebody who maybe experienced one or two events, discrete events, maybe a car accident or a divorce in the family. That, although we know that that's not simple at all, but those events are kind of located in a specific incident in time. And so they would have an impact on the developmental level of functional development of the child. But eventually, there would be enough space in between these events where development could pick up and maybe they could catch up on some of those lags. The red line represents many of the people that you and I will have worked with that from prenatal all the way across to their adult lives, they have experienced early and persistent maltreatment. And this affects their level of functional development in 7 different developmental domains that he would assess for. And the 7 developmental domains come from the work of Dr. Bruce Perry at the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And he adapted it for us to use in care team environments to assess at different intervals, 6-month intervals, when working with kids and also recommending different interventions for them as well as for their families. And the thing that I love about the interventions are very few of them required healthcare workers. They just required a network of care that was all working on the same team, working for the child to help them to heal. So this is how we would be organized if we didn't have any chronic stress or developmental traumas. Our brains would develop from the bottom up, just like this triangle is intended to represent our brain. And usually by about 4 months gestation, that survival brain where all the sensory mechanisms are developed, those are developed in utero. And then upon that development develops the emotional and relational brain. And then upon that development is the logical brain. And if this is allowed to develop unobstructed and through protection from chronic stress and trauma, this is what it would look like. We'd have a very large cortical structure, large prefrontal lobe. We'd have a very healthy logical brain, and our developmental functioning wouldn't be impaired at all. On the other hand, when we have people that experience chronic, early, persistent maltreatment, the survival brain is a lot bigger than the logical brain. So, what we have are people who are wired for sensitivity to threat, to stress, and there's an injury or an insult to the development of the survival brain, then all of the resulting brain structures, the emotion brain, the logical brain is impacted from that as well. So these are the 7 developmental domains that we would use in our assessment. And, from the bottom up, from 1 to 7, so 1 would represent neurological and biological maturity of our brains. So sometimes we would notice in kids, and sometimes you can even see this in adults as well, they'd have a difficulty with sleep-wake cycles. They would have difficulty with regulating their temperature. That's where, a lot of the biological development around using the washroom, toileting, basic self-care comes from how well that domain develops. And that there are different interventions to assist the development of that domain. The next domain that builds upon that is what we call the stress response. And for people who have experienced a lot of chronic stress and trauma, we have the overreactive stress response, high startle responses. And sometimes that would create a lot of difficulty in terms of sustaining relationships and tasks and being present. And quite often, I think if people who are working in acute care and emergency room, this is what's lighting up. This developmental lag, this domain, is what's lighting up when you're having difficulty stabilizing patients. The next developmental domain is emotion regulation, and then after that is attachment relationships. Five is identity development. Six is behavioral regulation, and this is usually where we really expect to see change. But in the land of healing from complex trauma, this is the last thing to change. All of the other structures and developmental domains need to be healed before behavior regulation changes. And the thing that we assess a lot in school settings as well as mental health settings is cognitive and language development that comes from cortical regions of the brain. And so how you remember these 7 developmental domain names is what Chuck would teach us was no one eats apples in BC. NOEAIBC. So that's the acronym to remember the developmental domains that become assessed. So, like I said, neurological, biological maturity, it shows up as these kinds of symptoms. Um, you can read as well as I can. Maybe I should read it out loud for those of you who might be looking away from your screen. Doesn't recognize sleepiness, tiredness, hunger, or temperature. If awake at night, has difficulty going back to sleep, sensitive to tastes, textures, smells, overwhelmed by stimulation, difficulty using small objects, clumsy, uncoordinated, tics, spasms, and seizures. The overreactive stress response. Okay, so some of us I've heard of 0 to 60 patients, just like one thing happens and they're into a full-blown stress response, which looks like fight, flight, flood, or freeze. Strong reactivity, great intensity in their affect and in their behavior and their reactions. It's because sometimes people are standing on the yellow staircase, the vigilant staircase, all of the time as a result of chronic states of feeling overwhelmed all of the time. And the task is to get people kind of down the stairs into the yellow and the green zones. Um, Here's another picture. So this is what we would sometimes call the kids that go from 0 to 60 in like 1 second. It's because their engines are already revving at 30 or 45. So they can go to an overreactive stress response very quickly. So what is the intervention? Well, sometimes you have to, I don't know, in Vancouver, we don't have parking meters anymore. We pay on the apps. For those of you who are as old as I am and you remember putting coins in a parking meter, you have to put it in before the time get expired, before the red flag comes up and that overreactive stress response happens, or you get the bad ticket from the ticketing person. So sometimes the intervention is you have to feed the meter before that happens. You have to regulate that overreactive stress response before. So it has to be completed routinely and in advance before full-blown responses. It's preventative. It regulates stress responses and it heals the fear center. And this is something that can also work to heal developmental lags. Massage. Now, this is an empirically supported treatment for a lot of mental health concerns, including sensory difficulties and overreactive stress responses, and for coping with the effects of toxic stress. And this is something that we have been doing as Indigenous people for a long time. It's a reclaiming practice, the body work that we do. And this is something that also belongs to us, the baby swing, the hammocks. Now we can do what we call a tight tuck-in. This will help to heal the overreactive stress response. We also know that it helps with vestibular development in infants, as well as adults who need this as well. There are some encouraging studies that are coming out about being in swings and in hammocks within 20 minutes, we start to develop those very healing theta waves in our brain. And theta waves are like the opposite of our brains being traumatized. So this is one way in which we can reverse the impacts of toxic stress and trauma. The baby swing that you see on the left is something that I built for all of my children. And this is something that was always in Anishinaabe houses. I know Cree people use these too. Many Indigenous people use these, and we keep them in our houses for not just our own babies, but for baby visitors. But because the action of swinging in our knowledge is something that helps facilitate that transition from the spirit world to the physical world. When babies are really fresh from the other side, their spirits are still settling here, and the swing has a method of settling the spirit. And from an Indigenous perspective, and looking at the impacts of what trauma does, it does unsettle our spirit. And sometimes the first step to healing is to stabilize our spirit. So there's Cree scholars in Alberta. Darlene Auger is doing a lot of work with neuroscientists as well as Cree scholars on how the baby swing can be used for elders as well and residential school survivors to heal from the impacts of developmental trauma and loss. I'm running out of time. Here's the cozy nest. Anybody have a chair or a beanbag chair? I know sensory integration rooms in schools are all the rage now. I mean, we can turn to our colleagues in occupational therapy. They're very well schooled on how to build these kind of cozy environments to calm and regulate the stress system. When I think about what it's like to be inside of a lodge or a teepee, those are naturally sensory integration spaces. And now we're starting to arrive at this in our contemporary built environments and building them as rooms within our schools and our healing centers. But our lodges, our home lodges, were very much constructed with this in mind. Drumming and singing. So the rhythm, the bilateral rhythm, we know from the work of Dr. Francine Shapiro is very good for metabolizing some of the shock and the stress that's imposed on the body due to PTSD or the impacts of PTSD. And we do know that the vibration and the drum, the healing impacts, not just physically, but as well as spiritually and emotionally, can work to break down some of the chronic toxic stress and toxic energy that becomes embedded within our bodies as a result of historical trauma and loss. Calm music. Okay, so this pillow on the right, the sleep therapy, this was one of the prime interventions that we used to give kids and families for those kids that had the really difficult sleep-wake cycles, because this would be the intervention to stimulate the vestibular bones that would sometimes, from a trauma-informed perspective, really address that sleep-wake cycle. I mean, we can have disrupted sleep-wake cycles for a variety of reasons. But for kids and adults who have experienced developmental lags in their low brainstem due to early and persistent toxic stress, this would be an effective intervention to help to ameliorate that developmental lag. Also playing calm music and having different sound generators to help with those low brain structures that have been impacted by toxic stress and trauma. Dancing and horseback riding is also another way to help heal those impacts. I talked a little bit about bilateral coordination, tapping. Lots of questions here and running out of time, all kinds of things. Rocking, the bilateral movement is also very soothing and will help to create the experiences to change those neural pathways that lead to overreactive stress response and overwhelm to more calming, soothing states. And then, of course, we have the sweat lodge, we have smudging, we have our spirit baths, all these cleansing activities that are intended to stabilize our spirit and help us to release some of the trapped emotions. And I just put this up here as a resource where if you like this approach to conceptualizing healing from trauma, as well as reducing addictions, we have a podcast series called Pitaqueo. It's co-hosted by Dr. Brenda Restool and Dr. Holly Graham, other First Nations women psychologists in Saskatchewan and Ontario, respectively. And we interview other First Nations psychologists practicing at the community level and sometimes in academia as well, conducting research, and we get their perspectives on how to recover from intergenerational trauma and loss healing. and whatnot. So this is a resource for you to continue to extend your learning. And I know I'm coming out to the question and answer parts, those who have already answered Q&As. I don't know how to answer some of these. Should I use the chat or I should use the Q&A function? Is that what you would like?
LNAs, thank you very much. What we'll do is when we're ready, we'll get started with the Q&A. I know that there are some folks that submitted questions beforehand. We'll also address, and then we'll go to the Q&A session.
Sure.
Uh, Thank you so much, LNAs. I hope I didn't cut you off before you finish.
Not at all, not at all. I have about 16 different instruments that I could cut and paste either into the Q&A box that were developed based on Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart's work in intergenerational trauma and loss. If you would like me to do that, I could do that.
That'd be great. If you can start with that, that would be
Yeah.
amazing. And then I'll also start to have some dialogue with you. I know that we have started to put some of those pre-submitted questions, so maybe I'll start with those, and then I'll get to the Q&As if our live audience as soon as possible. So, Elenice, again, thank you so much. I've been just taking down notes, learning so much from your session. I know that our audience is doing the same. So maybe I'll ask you to comment first. What are some of the, there's a person who works in the mental health and substance use, urgent care and acute care.
Yes.
What are some of the measures that you feel that can be used in these settings to support our patients that present to mental health and substance use clinics? Do you have maybe point out, maybe welcome your thoughts, some key tips that you have for us?
Okay. I mean, I have about 16 that I can talk about. Um,
That's great.
just but whether they're appropriate for the setting and for the patient, I can't. I can only share. There's the historical trauma response questionnaire that's created by Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart. It measures psychological responses and coping mechanisms related to historical trauma among Indigenous people. There's a historical loss scale. It measures the impact of historical losses on Indigenous communities. There's the Indigenous Risk Impact Scale screen. There's a cultural connectedness scale. I'm just trying to see where's the best place to cut and paste this because it's not easily going into the chat. But maybe in the Q&A, and I'll just have to answer somebody
You bet.
um,
We can cut and
randomly. Yeah.
we can
Okay.
cut and paste, that would be great. And the
Yeah.
person who posed that question, if you have any follow-up question, please enter it into Q&A. We'd love to continue to address that to where you'd like to see. Um, Perhaps the next one is uh, this is an interesting one. Is there a culturally safe or more appropriate way to approach someone on the street that may be having a kind of a overdose event or having you observe that that person need help? Any suggestions there?
Well, that line between life and death is very thin in those moments. And so sorry. Keep getting all these interruptions. I thought I put do not disturb on. But it's really hard to kind of mind read the person at the time what would feel appropriate, particularly when they're so vulnerable. But from an Indigenous perspective, and just like we learned, from how we opened this workshop with Elder Glyda Morgan, is you always have to acknowledge spirit. And stabilizing the spirit is not something that anybody's trained in medical school or nursing school to do, but that is exactly what would be the emphasized importance from a First Nations perspective. And how to do that, would flow from what comes from a place of integrity for the practitioner. Because in order to do things like this in a culturally safe way, especially when you're engaging with issues or matters of spirit, is to only practice what you know. Please do not try to practice something that you don't know or understand, but maybe come and approach that person with that thinking that, particularly, as an Indigenous person, we're very similar in the sense that we are the spiritual descendants of the ancient ones, and we used to look after ourselves in a very particular way that included the spirit, that included that domain, and that it's very present in the world of addictions too, because that's usually where we have our response to the historical losses that we've experienced due to the religious persecution, some people will call it, or spiritual attacks that Indigenous people have and continue to endure. I mean, we still work in spaces where we can't even practice our most basic approaches to looking after ourselves. I had one elder say, you know, if all we're allowed to do in a healthcare setting is smudge, that would be like to say a psychiatrist, all you're allowed to do is administer aspirins. So in some ways, we're still a long ways away from including and recognizing First Nations worldviews around health and healing and responding to addictions and trauma. And I recognize the ethical tensions that are on us as health and caring professionals, that we have to really stay in our lane and work from our code of conduct and things like that. But it perhaps in changing the way that we think, in the way that we view people, view them instead as the spiritual descendants of the ancient ones from here. And the ancient ones from here have been here for a very long time. And we represent that. And we're very, very important because of that.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much, Annalise. Maybe I'll ask for two things. We're going to transition to some of the live questions now.
Sure.
Before we do so, maybe what we'll do is if you're okay, Annalise, we'll take down your slides so that the audience can see you
Yeah.
in full
Yeah.
glory. Wonderful. And then secondly, also Elder Glider very often may have some, well, not may, clearly has a lot of wisdom. And I wonder, Elder Glider, at any time, if you'd like to make a few comments and thoughts to date, that'll be great. Maybe let me open up a little bit to Elder Glider first. Any observations or comments? We always enjoy your wisdom, and you've always in the past participate in these Q&As and bring your wisdom out. And so, Elder Glider, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. Just wondering if you heard any reactions at this point or thoughts and wisdoms that you'd like to share. No worries. There could be some technical issue there also. So maybe what I'll do is I'll go on to the first live question. Franny, thanks for, Elder Glider. Sorry, I saw you.
Sorry. First of all, thank you, Dr. Kendall, and a really huge thank you to Dr. Ellenaise Ferguson. I really want to say how much I enjoyed what you had to share with our circle, our sacred circle here. And what I really, really appreciate is the resources that you have provided, and all of your research and what you have presented. And what really resonates with me is the healing of sound for the different instruments of what we can use as caregivers, people that are trained. And of course, we're always wanting to be careful and know what we are able to provide and be sure of what we are doing in our work with our people on their healing path, so that we're not harming them, unintentionally harming them. And I like that you said how to stabilize our spirits. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of maybe ways to do that. And again, we have to be careful. And I really like the putting in a motion of, I forget her name, that does the, it's like a swing, an adult swing. Yes. And our people have been doing that for so long. And there's so many ways that are being brought back. And I just raise my hands to you for doing this work. And I am looking forward, because I'm on a call, I can't see any of the information that was posted, and hopefully I can access that. And I just want to say also in closing that how do we look after ourselves, even with our people that are in hospitals, if we're only allowed to smudge?
Yeah.
And I like that statement because doctors are using, what if they can only use one thing? And that really resonates with me. I just want to say that. And there's so much more that I want to raise my hands to you for, but I will stop there because others want to ask you questions. And thank you so much, Emote Squagan, Dr. Alanis Ferguson, and I look forward to hopefully seeing your notes and sometime, even if it's later, I look forward to that. So thank you, Emote Heitzka OCM. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Kendall.
Thank you. Nace, any comments or thoughts?
Oh, I want to answer so many of these questions. I really appreciate the validation, because sometimes when you talk about spirit and spirituality in healthcare settings, you're worried you're going to get a complaint at your licensing board because, it gets too woo-woo. But for our people, I mean, this is how we view the world. It's a worldview issue, and it's something about changing the way we see things and we conceptualize things. Well, how it maps onto your practices, that's going to be up to you. That's your individual calls. But I want to answer this one question five. Any evidence to support or contradict common trauma treatments such as prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy in Indigenous populations? And I think that the cognitive processing therapy, those cognitive approaches, we love them as healthcare providers, but I would like to respond to that by returning back to the developmentally informed model of conceptualizing trauma. And trauma is trauma is trauma. Our brains develop all very similarly. It's in order, it's neurosequential. But if we become obsessed with language and cortical structures and treating that at that level, we just risk shifting everything around on the top and not addressing the substantive injuries that lurk below. And because sometimes these symptoms, the way they manifest, is because something hasn't developed properly beneath that, we need those other interventions that engage our senses and that to heal and soothe that stress response in those lower regions of the brain before we can even get up to those cortical structures. And I think that's the same for everybody.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for that. What happened is I know that Dr. Ferguson, many folks can join us till 1 o'clock only, and many
Okay.
of them can stay till 1:30. And so at this point, I'd like to just put a poll question up, just to ask the audience one poll question, and also I'm going to ask my colleagues to put the CME response, CME asking you for feedback of the session, and
Okay.
so if I can ask my colleague to put that link, and then you see the poll now. This is only one poll question today. Just like to know whether you're watching this alone or watching it with a group or with a group of folks. If you can respond to that, that will be fantastic right now. So we'll have that poll question up for about a minute or so, and then we'll close it. In the meantime, we have put together the QR code. And so that's the feedback that we'd love to get from you. Today's round is, again, many of the feedback you have that accumulate to today's round and all the subsequent rounds. And then finally, if you'd like to have a CME certificate, again, on the chat, you'll be able to obtain that certificate by clicking on that link. So again, thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to switch back to questions now. Thank you for those who are joining us and may have to, in some ways, get off the bus for now, but we welcome you back on the bus next time. And again, this talk is recorded, so you can always visit and also see the last half hour of the questions and answers. So anyways, in the Q&A, Franny asked, I wonder if the nervous system responds to the hammock, using the hammock
Mm,
therapy, is because it mimics the action of being in the womb.
yes.
What do you think?
Yes, yes, so all of that. I mean, there's a deep scholarship around the baby swing. And some of it is actually like deeply spiritual knowledge. And some of it is handed down, through the generations, just through stories. And yes, it's intended to do that. Same with the tight tuck-ins, the cradle boards. A lot of the indigenous baby carrying practices from all over the world have this wisdom too. And then sometimes when there's interruptions in development in utero, and this is a very critical stage of development for our health and well-being as we, are born and subsequently develop into adults. If there's any insult or injury that happens in utero, those developmental legs need to be healed as well. And sometimes we do need to create a period of time where we mimic that in utero experience and reestablish safety in order for those legs to redevelop. I mean, it takes 6 weeks for one axon and one dendrite to grow long enough to make a new neural connection. So these experiences can't just be one-offs, right? These are things that we have to integrate into our daily living as habits. And when you're in a acute crisis center, you might not have the luxury of being able to put somebody in a hammock. But what if we could? What if we could, and that helped to kind of alleviate some of the violence that are experienced by nurses and frontline healthcare staffs?
Mm,
Yeah.
excellent. Thank you. I'm going to go back to one of the pre-questions and then we'll go to live questions again. Do you have any tips or suggestions how to integrate the therapies that you suggested with, say, cognitive behavioral therapy? Are there ways that you can figure out you can do that integration? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I know a lot of times in psychotherapy, we really are criticized for leaving the senses behind, that it's kind of a residue of Freud and the couch, that we just, are facing away and, are free associating and, using our left language brain quite often. And that's all fine if we're stable in our emotion and relational brain and if our fear center isn't activated. So if our fear center has been activated, our frontal lobes close. And if they can become activated again, they stay closed. And we know that for children, it takes 45 minutes of safety, and taking care of people's senses and reducing agitation and sensory insults in order for those to open again.
Mm,
So in order to do talk therapy or relational based therapy, you have to look after that fear stem first. And
mm,
quite often, I mean, that's where the tight tuck-ins, the cozy nest, the tapping. Um, and sometimes, for some folks who are trained in different trauma repair psychotherapies like somatic experiencing or EMDR, there are long phases of safety and stabilization built into those treatments. And I would say the same thing would be true for CBT, but quite often we're seeing people in a rush. And so we don't have enough time to help people get to safety. And often we'll work with them and then we'll return them to environments where they're chronically unsafe. And I know somebody had questions about people who are incarcerated and how to work with people in a way that respects their human rights when they're incarcerated. And we know that when people are incarcerated, they're also not safe there either. So it's very, very hard to do these higher cognitive structure treatments and therapies when people can't return to safety or even experience safety. We can't get to that stage 2 trauma repair. We can only do stage 1 stabilization work. And that's good work, but it's just a way in.
yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. It kind of also merges with the next Q&A. Arun, thanks for your excellent comments. Arun, feel Elenace, your talk is beautiful. And looking at both we've, look at a biomedical model. Uh,
Hmm.
Aaron's referring that to biochemical precision, but then the role of cultural precision also
Hmm.
minimized in healthcare. And the fact that you have surfaced it, bring it up, and the principles of philosophy of that practice is very important. So Arun, thanks for that. And again,
Yes.
Nace, welcome, whether you have any further comments on that observation.
Oh, I'm trying to find the question, but yeah, I know sometimes we really we reenact our training and we operate from what our teachers have given us, right? And that word biomedical precision, I call it creative chemistry. You know, people who work with with medicines and drugs, and there is an art to that as well, right? But it's a parallel story, and it doesn't need to really interfere with other stories that people are living, their cultural stories, their spiritual stories. They can coexist. But for the issue of going back to, let's say, complex developmental trauma, the kind of trauma that happens all throughout the lifespan, um, there's a lot of history that informs those events. And if we are ignorant to those histories, that this is where we are at risk for inadvertently replicating damages. You know, we could be coming from a very, very good place as a healthcare practitioner, but if we don't understand the histories that give rise to those presentations, we will replicate them. We're all good people, you know, but we do re-replicate the environments that we work inside of. So some of the intervention, you know, there is awareness and respectful curiosity, and to genuinely think that that's an important part of your caring practice.
Mm.
And sometimes we don't have time for it. I mean, people are eating lunch right now, they're taking training, and you're going to go right back out there into the fire, and there's all kinds of emergencies. But it is worthwhile to take those moments to pause and reflect and learn. Because eventually, I mean, that's almost like putting coins into your parking meter. That's you getting the knowledge and putting it there when you need it in those moments where you have to make those really fast decisions, or you need to see a person's humanity differently in
Huge.
order to deliver the care.
100%. It makes me think that thanks to you, you're putting me and many of us into the professional hammock during this lunch, so we can cuddle. So it's just absolutely fantastic. Just let you know, Annalise, the questions I'm looking at is under Q&A. So at
Okay,
the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A. If you click,
got
you'll be.
them, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I also know that, Ellen, you've been looking at the list of questions too that was pre-submit. Do you have
Mhm.
anyone that you picked out that you'd like to address? And I welcome if you have some, one or two questions that jump out. I'd love to have your thoughts on them.
There's one here. I think it's question 4. Can you please speak to the approaches for addressing behavior and attitudes that appear racist, dismissive, or neglectful? And I know that this is a huge issue, and you can take a cultural knowledge approach to responding to this, or you can take an anti-racist approach to responding to this. And an anti-racist approach would be using the assumption that you, me, everybody is equally at risk of replicating racism, that it's not something that we are going to take in and identify and personalize with, but am I going to be an actor in this environment that re-perpetuates a practice, an attitude, or an approach that does create harm? And the first step is to really acknowledge, how does this harm show up? Is harm actually happening? And sometimes we don't always know, and we don't have the time, the way that our systems are set up to really reflect on these two. And also, if we have perpetuated that, if we have enacted that, how do we heal ourselves from having done that? I think that's a really important question for healthcare providers to reflect on. It's like, how do we heal ourselves after we've inflicted this damage on somebody? Because that creates an injury in us as well. We need to look after that. And then until we can look after that for ourselves, I think that we are still at risk of re-perpetuating these things.
Mm. Wow, excellent. Thank you for that, Annalise. Maybe what I would do, Annalise, is I'll switch between the Q&A and
Sure.
the questions that you see. So I'm going to go next to one of the listing on the Q&A. If you're interested, you can read that, and I'll come back to you and see if you have a question from that list that you have.
Sure.
Next comment is by Anonymous. Thanks for submitting that. As I learned from your teaching, my mind wonders if the healing impact of each of the variety of approaches you mentioned are shown to be short-term or long-term or both. What do you
Well,
think?
I would think of experientially based healing. It depends on neurogenesis. It depends on how long it takes for you to create those new neural pathways. And we know 6 weeks is usually typical for healthy brains, maybe longer for aging brains or people with different impairments and injuries. So if you want to change the way that your neural pathways are shaped, you have to be routine. You have to be regular. It can't be just be a little bit here, a little dabble do you, and that's it. It has to be sustained and predictable for long enough for those pathways to recreate, and for those injuries, if there are injuries, to repair. So your experiences are your scalpel. If you were holding a scalpel to change the way that your brain and your nervous system operates, you do that through your experiences. So yeah, it does take some patience, it does take some time. And that's why, under this approach, the assessment approach using a developmental approach is every 6 months you assess for change, because you're not going to see it right away. And the last thing that usually changes are behaviors, because
Mm,
that's more on the top. So it does take some commitment.
excellent. So sounds like, in addition to the therapy itself, this the building up that habits and that kind of
Yeah.
regularity to make lasting effect.
Our elders used to always say that too. We are our habits. So
Mm.
we have to be mindful of what our habits are. We become what they are. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And maybe with that, I'm going to ask Elder Glider whether you have any comments, especially, your elder's wisdom on that particular point. Again, if there's any additional comments, Elder Glider, from you. And then maybe Alan Nace, if you can look up the next question you'd like to answer from that list, that'd be great.
Sure.
Um, okay, so no worries, Elder Glider. Again, I know there's technical issues. So Alan Nace, back to you.
Okay, how about Robert Lehman's question? You just put it 4 minutes ago. It says, could you speak more about the behavioral changes being the last to change in trauma recovery, and how we as providers may be triggered in ourselves so we maybe remain with a compassionate approach? This is so true. I mean, even if I'm imagining us in a room with people with all of this dysregulation, and their heart rates and their respirations are elevated in response to their overreactive stress response, and that, when somebody is activated like that, if they're within 4 feet of us, the electrical activity around their hearts begins to affect our electrical activity around our hearts. And it's interesting because we know this now, because we have different imaging studies to let us know this now. But in the old days, when we would do psychotherapy, we would do it 4 feet nose to nose. And that
Mm,
was just something that was practice-based evidence. We didn't have any evidence to inform why that is. So the importance of re-regulating and co-regulating on healing the people we work with cannot be understated. And I know it sounds very simple and very basic, and many of us went to university for many years and we have all of these assessments and interventions and treatments. But if we ourselves can't down-regulate in these moments and be the stable base for somebody else who may be exhibiting an overreactive stress response, or who may have like no brain left because they have such biological immaturity due to low brain injuries or whatever it is that they're experiencing, we're not going to be able to do anything beyond what occurs in that moment. So, getting from that moment to the interventions that can kind of take hold and stick in a little bit longer is the task.
mm, mm.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to go back up to the top of the Q&A line. Monica made a comment, are there online resources for people to view, support ideas to address their own stress?
Oh, the NCTR, National Center for trauma research websites, an American website. There's a lot of resources there. Any work that's done by the Harvard Center for the Developing Child. I know adults tend to shy away from those resources because they think it's just for kids. But I remind all of the adults here on the call, like a lot of us, when we flip our lids, we are 8 years old again. We're little. So a lot of these resources are very appropriate for us when we are experiencing states of overwhelm and stress. So I would recommend those two. I know that there's an Alberta Center for Traumatic Stress. I'm not remembering it properly, but they have a lot of resources. And I'm very sorry to not
No.
remember, but everybody here is as good at Googling as I am. So
Yeah, not sorry at all. Glad to point those out. My colleagues are putting those links on, and
yeah,
please let us know if those are right links or any other. And also, I welcome around the
yes.
membership here. If you have any sources or you like to suggest, please put it on the chat for sure. The next comment is from an anonymous attendee. Can you speak more to using your approaches in treating addictions specifically? Are there groups of tools or approaches that you take more specifically for addictions? Welcome your thoughts there.
There is I'm going to direct you to a resource here, the Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. They have different instruments. The Native Wellness Assessment is specifically geared towards working with people in addictions. And again, it's all rooted in the same frameworks that I used in my presentation today. Maria Yellow Horse Brave Hearts, historical trauma approach, neurodevelopmental approaches to trauma. So I would refer them to those and the work of Carol Hopkins and the Thunderbird Partnership Foundation. There's a wealth of resources in there specifically around all different kinds of substance problems, including inhalant solvent abuse, benzodiazepine abuse. She's got a beautiful paper from benzos to berries. It's a really easy title to remember. And it talks not only about the interventions, but also the model, the treatment model that they used. So they moved from using a real risk assessment model when they were bringing kids into these detox facilities. Like, I mean, these kids were beating up healthcare workers. It was a really dangerous place to work. And then they moved from a risk assessment frame or risk management frame to a frame that was more informed by their creation story and responsibilities based Indigenous laws. That article, I mean, I can't articulate it fully here in this moment, but I can refer you to that article if you would like to see how they did that work. And they had fewer violent incidences in their treatment centers when they changed models. And that's
Excellent.
Carol Hopkins.
Yes, thank you. I think that's posted now in the link.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thanks to you pointing it out, Annalise, and I really
Colleen Dell. Yeah, Colleen Dell's work. Yeah, and Carol Hopkins. Yeah, that's the one.
I also want to thank my ICON colleagues for their speedy lookup. So appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Great resources on your team, Kendall.
I'm blessed with the team, and we're all blessed with you. Next comment, Jenna Lee, partially may be answered. Jenna asked, thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Ferguson. I'm curious whether you're aware of Indigenous health centers that have incorporated some of the trauma healing resources within the center. What are your thoughts there?
I hear of things that come and go, that things that were introduced, but then the person moved on and the thing didn't stay. And I'm not really well connected to the Vancouver coastal space, so I can't really say very much there. But I can talk about the All Nations Healing Lodge in Fort Qu'Appelle, Treaty 4 territory. I mean, that is one model of a First Nations run hospital that incorporates Indigenous healing with, allopathic medicine in a hospital environment. I can only refer to it, but I can't speak beautifully about it. Just know that it's there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Duck is asking, thanks for your comment. Can you talk more about a bit more about the nest? This is similar to the work of
Oh,
Darcia
yeah.
Naves, Nesting World,
Yeah.
Kinship Worldview. Your thoughts?
Thank you for the resource. I know like the thing when things work and are effective, it pops up all over the planet, and you'll notice other peoples and cultures doing these same practices and writing about it. Um, so the cozy nest intervention was actually something that we used to use in the complex care and intervention team. And it was for the very similar reasons of requiring an environment that can help a child integrate their senses
Mm,
and downregulate overwhelm. And it was just something that we picked up and started to use. It's like, what could we use in a real life house, like without altering the environment completely, where they could experience sensory integration.
hmm
So to build a hammock, you have to like wreck the walls and do things like that or spend money. But, to build a nest, all you need is blankets and a chair or a bed, right? But it's meant to do the same thing, similar thing.
Yes. Doug has a little bit of comment later on. I agree about the spiritual. I think the polycrisis that the world is facing is due to spiritual problems with the, it jumped off, spiritual problem with the Western world. We have a lot to learn from Indigenous wisdom. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Let me go to Max now. Max is saying, thank you for your presentation, Dr. Ferguson. To build on our first question, I'm wondering whether you've come across obstacles of implementing interventions uh, with the need for validation in a medical context, such as clinical trials. So, has there been much administrative red tape for you to cross in order to put these worldviews into practice?
It's interesting that you asked that. I mean, I teach ethics. I believe in ethics. I comport myself in an ethical way, but sometimes getting research studies past behavioral research ethics review has been a barrier, and we've lost these opportunities because sometimes these practices are linked to seasons and they're linked to, specific times. And it doesn't run on an institutional timeline, where they have a certain number of reviewers to review my study proposal. So I have lost the opportunity to engage in this work and provide that evidence because of that. Um, so yeah, it does. They don't easily coexist together. And sometimes I'm reminded of the Mohawks' two-row wampum treaty, where each each nation, the Dutch on one side and the Haudenosaunee on the other, they had their own systems and they were parallel and they were going in the same direction. And in that treaty, they weren't supposed to interfere with each other. And this was from an Indigenous governance perspective, but sometimes I think about this in terms of the world of medicine and healing too, as well because doctors and nurses and medical professionals are trained for a very long time in a very specific way. I almost can't see them, leaving their canoe and trying to get into another canoe. But if they can understand and appreciate and see how we have the same objectives and we have the same goals, what are some of the things that we can do to get out of each other's way so that we don't impair one another's work and we can work together under that basis. But at the same time, we have a history where Indigenous practices look too woo-woo. It's like we don't like practice-based evidence. We like evidence-based practice. And some of our practices are, really, really ancient, and some of them are also being reclaimed. So there was a period of time where we stopped transmitting this knowledge, and that knowledge went away or went underground, and we're in the process of reclaiming that. I mean, that's one occasion where we should have the sovereignty and the opportunity and the resources to do that work without any barriers.
Mm,
So that's the work of decolonization, which is another topic, right?
I hear you. Yeah. Love that image of two canoes and
Yeah.
traveling to be able to cross on that and cross learning. Linda has a comment. Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. We forget the etymology of psychology is Greek. Psych means soul and spirit. Logos, reason, and study So stabilizing the soul is so
Yeah.
fundamental. So just want to reinforce that point that you've pointed out. Thank you, Linda.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, Kim was wondering, would it be appropriate to ask folks if they can feel their ancestors to support some spirit stabilization without doing harm, but offering something in the moment? What do you think about that?
I'm gonna get really woo-woo with you, Kimberly, here. Sometimes I feel really, if I'm struggling with somebody and I don't know what to do, and I don't maybe feel like I know enough to help a person, and then you kind of reflect that that ethical dilemma: is no treatment better than the treatment I'm going to give? So should I bother because this is outside of my capacity, or is there something inside of my capacity that I can offer? And in those moments, Kimberly, this is like where I've prayed in my office, to my own helping spirits, like help me figure out what to do. I mean, I don't claim to hear voices or see things. I'm not gifted in that way, but we have five senses, but we also have intuition and we also have connection to our ancestors if we consider to use it. And we can consult in those manners too, as we're starting to really kind of reflect on our ethical practice, right? So sometimes we don't want to give up. We do want to create that spirit stabilization or crisis stabilization, if you will. Some people may be more comfortable with that language, but we don't know how to do it. So that's one method that I have used. And then I also can ask for help. And this is where peer consultation or peer supervision or consulting with somebody like Glida or somebody who is available and willing to help can assist with that. But I don't claim to have any and all of the answers. There's some people that are much more talented and gifted than I am that could answer that.
Thank you for that. And maybe we'll take one more, and then what we'll do is after that, I'll invite Elder Glida to make some closing comments and thoughts. Aaron actually has asked a pair of comments. I'm going to put them to one. Do you have any recommendations how we can support First Nations people to help them step down the stairs towards calm
Mhm.
instead of escalating? And
Yeah.
also, if you are only in a setting that you can't provide long-term trauma healing, but more in a kind of a short-term intervention, do you have any tips there how we can help that de-escalation? How do we observe it? How do we make sure that we support our First Nations people?
Well, one thing would be just to teach them that model, show them that staircase or to draw that out. Because if you explain things to people and you give them some kind of a tool for them to self-assess, the likelihood that they are going to improve increases. Because then you give them greater capacity, you give them a sense of control, and you give them a new tool of which they can use to self-reflect. Whether or not that's evidence-based, I mean, I know that teaching self-assessment is evidence-based, but quite often the yardsticks for First Nations people are so foreign. I mean, we're asked to stand next to a standard, whether it's the Canada Food Guide, Eat This Way, or whether it's I don't know, a parenting plan, put this into practice, raise your kids this way. These yardsticks are so foreign, we don't see ourselves in that. But something simple like this is what it's like to exist in your body. This is how it feels in your body when you're on this high level of a staircase. You can only tolerate so much. And one thing I didn't talk about was the window of tolerance, which you can also teach people about. And when your window is very small, then this is the kind of a day where you might want to stay home and do a little bit more activities that require less sensory demand. But most of us don't have this training and knowledge about how our brains and our nervous systems work and how it shows up in our body and our experiences. But if we teach people, I think that they're going to use that, just like I do too. I mean, it really changed and transformed how I looked after myself as a psychologist and as a parent and a relative and a family member, right? I mean, I'm still First Nations and have a community that's profoundly impacted by a lot of death and dying We go to a lot of funerals too, so we really have to like look after ourselves. And we can show people how to self-assess.
I like that a lot. In fact, as you spoke about the image, the stairs and the speedometer show up in my brain,
Yeah.
and really help to kind of anchor that with an image and helping our patients to be able to use that as a tool. That's a very good way. I do apologize. I can't get to all the questions. Just great questions, comments, and we'll continue to read through it. And again, I just want to thank you, Dr. Ferguson, for excellent presentation, and also your authentic answers, and also fantastic resources. Maybe what I'll do is I'll invite Elder Glyda to see if you comments or thoughts before we close the session at this time. Elder Glyda, again, there may be a technological issue, but Elder Glyda, maybe I pass the time to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kendall. Thank you for all that you do and for your team. And another thank you, raising my hand, to Dr. Elnese Ferguson. And I really appreciate all of what you shared, and it's a lot. I personally don't have a science background for all of that, but at the same time, how do we work with our spirit, or how do we set the good intentions of our work to who we are working with, and accepting them where they're at and then moving from there. Sometimes we know already what we need, and we're like guides and bringing that out. And I heard you say something like that. And I think also the metaphor of the canoe, traveling in the canoe. And when you're in the canoe, we're all in the canoe, each person. And are you at the front? Are you looking forward, or are you in the back steering? And also looking at around the different obstacles that we might be facing, the rock or the rough waters, or can we stop and then work on something within ourselves? I think that working with our spirit is so important, and it's not really accepted in some places, and that's okay. But I think for future, it's going to become more and more accepted. As an Indigenous mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, I do believe all of the work will become accepted. And I noticed that a lot of our teachings are coming back. I love the way that it's being brought by yourself and by your colleagues, and just bringing that into our Western model, if I can use that language, and opening up that piece and bringing it in for all, and just being open and knowing that there's more than one way when we work with our people who we're trying to support. And I always like working with families, and I know some of my work is women who use substances and their children, and so I really appreciate a lot of what you brought here. And I'm also thinking that, as well as everyone else here has appreciated that. And again, just raising my hands in gratitude and appreciation, and just sending you all the love and caring as you continue on in your work, Dr. Elnese. Ferguson, raising my hands to you. Thank you. Himot, Osiem, Chaichka. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Kendall. Thank you.
Wonderful. Elder Glyder, thank you very much for your wise words. And Dr. Ferguson, I know on a virtual site, it's hard to hear the claps, but I know that is we are all clapping and thanking you, and both in our spirit and also in hearing professionally learning from you. So Dr. Ferguson, thank you so much for your time. And on behalf of VCH Indigenous Health, Ministry of Health, First Nations Health Authority, VPSA, and the VPSA Engaging Physician Indigenous Cultural Safety Task Group, thank you all for participation. Looking forward to our next round already. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.